We here at Squawk Box have been campaigning for politicians to give back their pork to help pay for Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. Our next guest offers up another possibility. He says we should consider following the path of President Lyndon Johnson. In 1968, LBJ enacted a one-year 10% income tax surcharge to help pay for the cost of Vietnam. A colossal example of bad timing. Joining us now live from Washington, Robert McIntyre, Director of the Citizens for Tax Justice. Robert, good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning.
You're not going to get a lot of people to say, yeah, I want more taxes.
Well, the choice is you either pay for this or you send the bill to our children. And if you're going to pay for it, you should do it in a way that's reasonably fair.
Slam dunk. Send the bill to the kids.
Well, that may be your view, but mine is, that we should ask the people who can afford to pay for it to chip in the most, but everybody ought to be chipping in. And if you would, a perfect plan might be closing the loopholes that allow some of our big companies to pay no taxes or going after the tax cheats and things like that. But if you can't get that through the Congress, then a 10% income surcharge says, look, if you're paying $50 in income tax, you'll have to pay $5.
If you can't get the
if you're paying $1,000, you'll pay $100. And if you're paying $100,000 in income tax, which means you're very wealthy, you'll pay $10,000. Now, what's wrong with that?
If you can't get the former plan through Congress, how are you going to get that through Congress?
Well, it's because
that's going to hit everybody.
Well, it's not going to hit everybody. A family of four in this country doesn't start paying income tax until they make about $45,000 now. So they're not going to be affected. So it's only people better off than that. And I think that the general public would say, look, I can afford to chip in something as long as I know that the people at the top of the income scale are paying something commensurate also.
Mr. McIntyre, it's Noah Blackstein from Dynamic Funds. It's hard to look at the highway bill and what's involved there and say that if the government raises taxes, it'll be spent properly. Why are you opposed to creating economic free zones like some people have proposed, where people pay no taxes and are given the incentives to rebuild, as opposed to slapping this tax? I mean, you can put this tax on, and how do you know it won't build a subway under the Hudson River for all we know? I mean, it would seem economic free zones would be better, wouldn't it?
Well, those reduce the government's revenues, add to the budget deficit, and make the bills for our children even bigger. We've been trying this trickle-down supply-side thing under President Bush now for 5 years, and what we've got are deficits, counting what we owe Social Security, in excess of $500 billion every year. And we can't keep doing that. You've got to find a way to pay for it, and you might as well pay for it in a way that's fair.
So you're pretty sure that the tax cuts enacted earlier haven't helped the economy, even though we're 5% unemployment, and I don't know how many quarters in a row now we've had pretty good GDP growth. That had nothing to do with the tax cuts, I guess.
Well, I mean, the tax cuts in the short run at the beginning during the recession were a good idea. The problem was they were permanent and long-term, and we can't afford to do that unless you think we can run the government entirely with Chinese money forever.
Well, I would just remember that the deficits were much worse as a percentage of GDP in the 80s, and that eventually we had a balanced budget, right?
Well, we had a balanced budget because Bill Clinton and the Congress cut spending and raised taxes.
Right, but why couldn't we do that again? You don't see long-term interest rates, so you're not seeing any crowding out. It's not like you're seeing the worst-case scenario from these big deficits yet, are you?
Well, you just said, why can't we do that again? We can do that again, which means we need to raise taxes and cut unnecessary spending. But right now, we have some necessary spending to deal with the hurricane situations.
Well, that's what deficits are for, right?
Well, no, deficits are something you do briefly, but you want to balance the budget in the long run, or otherwise our kids won't be able to afford to pay for Social Security or to build the roads or to educate their kids, and we need to do those things.
But to follow up on Joe's point here, I mean, when you have extraordinary events, that would seem to be exactly the wrong time to try and balance the budget.
Well, that's not true. These extraordinary events are going to be an economic stimulus from the government at one side, something we don't need right now, and you ought to offset that by either cutting spending, and that's going to be difficult to do. We've had a Republican Congress, for quite a while now, and they, according to Tom DeLay, they've cut everything they can. And the alternative is to raise taxes and do it in a fair way. The president has cut taxes tremendously, and this would just take back a small portion of that.
All right, Robert, thank you very much for your thoughts. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Robert McIntyre, Director of the Citizens for Tax Justice.